All right, welcome back to another episode of Blown Coverage. I'm with my co-host Caleb Schroyer. Caleb, week 6 is in the books. Um, Interesting week. We kind of thought it would be a bit of a down week, and it was compared to last week and maybe even the week to come. I thought the 11 a.m. window was maybe a little bit boring. I was trying to find like a main game to watch, and the only game that was kind of competitive was the Michigan Wisconsin game. The late window, you mostly just had the Miami Florida State game, and that was okay, but it was mostly maybe Miami controlling the game. But the 2:30 window did not disappoint. At one point, Boise State over Notre Dame. Boise was winning, Florida was winning, UCLA was winning, and Vandy was winning, all in the second quarter. So there was some action there in the 2:30 window. Not all the games were the best, but definitely some great storylines to come out of this week and discuss. What were your general thoughts on the weekend? I know it was a little emotional for you specifically.
Um, I thought overall it was. I mean, just like you said, it's like 2:30 slot was just crazy packed, and of course that's when Texas played too. And just ritualistically, that's the game I got to focus on. So I had to go back and kind of watch the other highlights of the other games, but the 2:30 slot was insane. I thought the 6 o'clock slot was okay too. Because at the beginning of the Mississippi State A&M game, it was pretty competitive, and then y'all started pulling away like in the second quarter and stuff. But it looked like it was going to be an interesting game, and we'll get to the Florida State Miami game too. That was okay, but for the most part, Miami dominated. So really, the only slot worth mentioning, honestly, is just the 2:30 slot. But it was still a really good week of football. A lot of good storylines came out of it.
Agreed, agreed. So I think we have to go in order of importance. Two pretty important storylines to come out of this week, but I think the most important
Hmm.
and biggest storyline is Penn State losing to UCLA. UCLA came into this game winless. They had never led at any point this season. Head coaches fired, two coordinators gone, at least from their roles. And now number 7, Penn State, is coming into town, and the spread on this game was at one point 25 points towards Penn State and in their favor. And I was watching this game, and uh, Penn State just looked like a team that played for their entire season last week and just thought that they were done at least till their next big game. And I don't even know who that is. I know they have, I think, Indiana on the schedule. I don't remember if Ohio State's on the schedule. I think it is. I think they are. Uh,
Maybe like within
and
like or something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And they just came out flat. UCLA, they were just going right down the field on Penn State, especially the entire first half. Penn State's supposed to have this great defense. I'm sure they do. They can have an off week. But, holding Oregon to 3 points in that first half, uh, they looked like, okay, this is a legit defense. But UCLA, I mean, they just drove right down the field on them. This is the first 5 offensive possessions for UCLA. Touchdown, field goal, touchdown, touchdown, field goal. And Penn State offensively just looked unimpressive. Yes, I think their talent finally took over in the second half, because they were able to nearly come back and win the game. But I continue to just not be impressed with Drew Aller. 19 for 26, 200 yards. Like, you need a guy that's going to take your program to that next level. To me, he just doesn't seem like the guy.
Yeah.
There's going to be questions now, even more so, about James Franklin, which I'm sure maybe you have some thoughts on that, and we'll get into him specifically. But UCLA 446 total yards, what's supposed to be against what's supposed to be one of the best league defenses.
Hmm.
Credit to UCLA, but to me, this is a game about Penn State, James Franklin, And, Penn State, they had aspirations to win it all this year. That's not happening. But anyway, fun game to watch. What were your thoughts on the game?
I thought the game was interesting. I think so. The tight end coach was the one calling the plays for UCLA. Forgot his name. I think his dad was a coach or something at one point, just because the name sounds familiar. But then another interesting thing was he was talking about how when he was calling the plays, he didn't even like know how to use the headset really. So there's some plays that he was calling, and either the headset would be up or he pressed the wrong button on the side panel. So Nico didn't even get to play. Okay.
Hmm.
And so think about that. Like, and that's normal too. I'm not saying that's anything bad. I'm sure that's everywhere around the country if someone were thrust in that spot all of a sudden. But just think about like so many different turnovers and everything like that as far as like staff and just thrust in the new roles, and UCLA was able to go out there and offensively steamroll that Penn State defense. So it really makes you think, okay, did James Franklin like literally put their entire stock into the season into that Oregon game? Which, don't get me wrong, that's a huge game, right? But at the same time, you can't necessarily look at one week and not at least have some sort of a game plan prepared for the next week. I'm sure they did, but I don't know. It's just I find it like mind-boggling, to be honest with you, that a team with this much talent lost to UCLA. Um, so up to this point, Penn State had 34 straight wins against unranked opponents, and that ended yesterday, which is another kind of thing. You mentioned, so Nico had a great day. He had 166 passing yards, 70% completion percentage, two passing touchdowns, 138 rushing yards, and three touchdowns, which honestly it's kind of crazy. I forgot his name, but one of the he used to be, I believe, on the SEC network, or not SEC network, but the CBS panel. And he was like, he's starting to look like Vince Young out there. And I was like, well, those are stats like he used to have for sure. Drew Aller,
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I think he had a good day as well. Like, I don't pin this Penn State or this loss on Penn State on Drew Aller. He had 73% completion percentage. He had 200 yards, like you said, two passing touchdowns, and 78 rushing yards. Really and truly, that's he was pretty much the majority of their offense. And it's kind of weird because Penn State, just like any Big Ten team, honestly, or the majority of them, you just think like they'll have a good offensive line and at least a decent run game for whatever reason. And in previous episodes, we've talked about how Penn State has one of the best backfields in the nation. And I still believe that. I just don't understand how they were not able to utilize that. I really don't. Like, you can't sit here and tell me that Penn State wouldn't have better control of the line of scrimmage 9 out of 10 times that they played UCLA, and especially with the running back deal, they would number one have um, they would have control of the line of scrimmage, and then also with their elite running backs. And that's just a recipe for them to win pretty easily. Even if their defense played crappy, they can just control the clock and win it that way. So overall, it's very interesting. James Franklin, I don't know. Basically, they're in a situation where they've got to win out no matter what now. And even then, it could be potentially like, could they even reach the playoffs? Who knows? Who knows? Two-loss team. There's a good chance they could probably get in depending on how they play the rest of the season. But they definitely made it a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, if they win out, that is their only chance because they do face Ohio State. But other than that, I mean, let's face it, they're probably not going to beat Ohio State. But I think even if they did, if they beat Ohio State, you have to talk about them again. But look, I just don't see it happening. I mean, I think there's got to be teams that are more worthy. People are going to remember that UCLA loss, and face it, people don't necessarily think that highly of Penn State anyway. I think they think, okay, it's a great program, but like you can't lose to UCLA and
Well,
really
especially with all the talent they have. I mean, that's the
exactly.
and it's like it will get to it kind of in a second, but Penn State's like their players, a lot of them are like upperclassmen, so these people that have
Mhm.
been there, it's kind of the garden's ready to be, harvested in a
Yeah,
sense,
yeah.
right? So it's from that perspective, from the Penn State fan base, I'm sure it's pretty rough because they've had really good talent like there for 4 years now, and they're about to go by, right? Go into the draft, and I mean, what do they really accomplish with it? I mean, last year I think they won one playoff game, if I'm not mistaken, maybe two. I know they beat Boise, but
I think it depends on what Penn State, I don't know in college, it's not called the front office, but the board of directors, whoever. But what do they think of themselves as
athletic
a foot?
directors,
Uh, what's that?
athletic director.
Athletic. Well, I know they have athletic directors, but they have like there's meetings with like a lot of people that whenever they're talking
Oh,
about
okay,
maybe
yeah,
getting
boosters
getting
and
rid
all
of a
that
coach.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah, the boosters. And what they think of themselves as a program, because if they
Huh.
think highly of themselves, I think, and I didn't necessarily think this last week, even though I hinted at it, but I think losing to UCLA is a fireable offense. And look, at what point do you just say, okay, we've seen where James Franklin can take us. We respect that he's a good coach, but we think we can do better. I think Penn State's one of the best jobs in the country. I think it's like probably a top 10 job, right? Um,
At least.
it's, yeah, yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised to see another big name coach want to go there. Uh, Look, it's just, you can't have that loss and get away with it. Kind of reading about it this morning, it's like, well, they're probably not going to do it because of the buyout stuff. And I get that. But look, it's probably not going to get much better than this year in terms of their opportunity.
Oh yeah, because they're
So,
basically going to have to restart all over again. And honestly, I'd have to take a
right.
look at like who they've gotten like in the recruiting, like uh who's behind Drew Aller to overtake his place. And don't get me wrong, I mean, any huge football team like Penn State can just go into the transfer portal and like do a mass overhaul. Like, don't get me wrong on that, but um, I don't know. Yeah, it'd be interesting. The
Well,
only
here's the deal. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Coach Saban made a good point on Saturday. He thinks that it's the most what words did he use? Basically, he was saying if you were to fire your coach like right now this season, it would have the most impact on your team than it ever has, just because the 30-day window people can get this transfer out. And think about the amount of people
Mhm.
that would transfer out with James Franklin getting fired. So that's a very good question because yes, I think up to this point, Penn State, I mean, they definitely have enough data on James Franklin to sit there and say, determine whether or not, like, okay, we want to keep you or not, And the thing is, he's he's consistently had them at least a 10-win season, okay, but not much more than that. But then also, if they pull the trigger, they're going to have to. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be rebuilding from the bottom per se, but a huge amount of talent that they have right now will leave, more than likely.
That's that's true, but we've talked about the quarterback, and yeah, Drew Aller is fine. I don't think he's great, but I mean, I think you could say maybe that's a James Franklin problem too, potentially. Why is it that
Yeah, well, that's
Dan Lanning can go from who was the quarterback last year?
Dylan
Gabriel,
Gabriel
and then this year
from
Dante
OU.
Moore, just like that, and the offense is
He
clicking.
got from UCLA. Yeah.
Right, right. Even Lincoln Riley, who hasn't had a lot of success in terms of the overall team, but is able to put together at least an offense every year and a quarterback, find the quarterback. Ohio State, I know that's kind of a different level, but they're always okay at quarterback, right? Good enough.
At least
Uh,
serviceable to get them far. Yeah.
and Penn State's never really had that. So that makes you wonder, okay, is that just the offensive system of James Franklin, or is he just not finding the right guys? So Yeah, I respect James Franklin and all that. I really do, but it's just like I think we've seen his capability, and maybe it's best for both to just say, okay, let's see what else we can do. Maybe we're better
Yeah,
without each other.
it's very hard because I mean, throughout his tenure, I mean, the Big Ten before all the additions like UCLA, Oregon, um, USC, Big Ten was a good conference to begin with, right? And then it just, and arguments could be made that they're the best conference in football. So Penn State is one of the best jobs, but also it's probably one of the hardest jobs because, like you just said, do you think a college player would rather go play at Ohio State or Penn State? Probably, I think James Franklin has to rely a little bit more like on homegrown players versus Ohio State, who can go nitpick from wherever they want in the country. So it's kind. I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like Penn State is like, yes, it is a great job, but it's like a different echelon between Penn State and Ohio State, or like the really, or Michigan even. You can make an argument there. So it's
Yeah, yeah,
I don't.
I agree.
Yeah. So I don't know. It'll be interesting, kind of how they do the next couple weeks. Um, Penn State. I guess the only question I have is their defense in their run game and the Penn State run game.
Yeah, and does their team continue to fight and not give up? But you said that James Franklin fighting for his job, all that. Speaking of fighting for the job, Billy Napier really
Okay.
fighting for his job this week. And look, no matter what happened this past week, I don't know if his job is saved. Uh, I didn't realize Billy Napier had actually been here now a full 4 years and really hasn't
Doesn't feel
done
like it.
much. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it. And I think the reason they have held on to him is exactly what you were saying about James Franklin and the transfer window and all that. So,
Because he has
interest.
recruited very well there, right? I mean,
Yeah,
he really has. And the thing is, Florida is like a very, very young team with very good players. And so it's like if they fired him, man, those players would leave more than likely, and it would set them back another 3 to 4 years. People don't really think about that
right.
either. Um, I mean, I guess if you were to get like an elite like team, like a elite head coach, maybe 1 to 2 years, but people aren't patient
Right.
like
Right, right. Well, they may have made it harder to fire him because of the results this past week. I know this was a very big game for you, being that you're a Texas fan, very emotional one. So I'll let you lead us off with this. Give me your thoughts on the Florida win.
So last week's episode, we talked about how we could kind of see Texas either just coming out and blowing them out, or it was just going to be this ugly contest. I don't think either of us really thought that Florida would be able to just basically, like, they led the whole game. Texas never led the game once. I don't think either of us expected that. I think the most impressive thing about this game was Florida was 1-3. And we just talked about, like we just mentioned, how is Penn State going to show up the rest of the year for James Franklin? Well, Florida came to play Texas at an elite level for Billy Napier. Um, Basically, this was like the first game I've seen in a while that we did not dominate the line of scrimmage. Okay, I think like the last game, I remember us like not being able to play this like well run or anything like that. I think we were pretty competitive against Ohio State last year. I would go back to like the Georgia. Anytime we played Georgia last year, that was the only team that made our offensive line look that ugly, and just we could not get a run game going. And that's really what this game boiled down to was Florida just dominated the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and whenever you do that, it makes a recipe for victory, right? Basically, hit Arch a lot. every play almost Arch Manning was about to get hit on every passing play, and basically we had no run game. And then Florida had some really good wide receiver play from two true freshmen, which is pretty insane too. So Arch was sacked 6 times, okay, and rarely had a clear pocket to throw from. And our run game was pretty much non-existent. Arch Manning he actually had more than 57 rush yards, but with all the sack yardage included, he only ended up with 57. And or excuse me, Texas had 57 or 52 rushing yards. Arch had 37 of those. Okay. So that kind of tells you, like, okay, Arch is just scrambling, and that's the only run game that we had. Okay. So it's going to make it to where the defense can just pin their ears back and go rush the passer, which they did. If you watch the game, the majority of the time, Arch was just running for his life, and people, it's a little irritating. People are like saying, "Oh, Arch sucks," and bench Arch, whatever. What young quarterback, regardless of, like, if we took his name away and we just looked at it from a first-time starting quarterback, how would you expect a young quarterback in their life cycle to react to getting hit that many times consistently? You probably wouldn't think they would have an elite game, right? I mean, and Arch by no means did he have an elite game. I thought he had 55% completion percentage. He had like 263 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in the fourth. However, I'm not saying that those 2 interceptions are justified by any means, but he was kind of just having to let it rip, and it was trying to get us a score. So would he have been a little bit more conservative if we weren't in that situation? Probably, but still. So I think the biggest thing is we were both very high on Texas defense. I think we still can be. I think just Florida's just has really good talent, and they finally put it together this week against us. I think my biggest question for Texas is how are we going to respond? Because next week we got Oklahoma. Okay, big rivalry. Okay, arguably one of the biggest games of the year for us, if not the biggest. Defense, are we going to be able to kind of fix what we allowed Florida to do? Florida had really and truly, Florida had a really good balanced offensive attack against us. The running back had over 100 rushing yards against us. And then Florida's wide receiver had a over 100-yard game, true freshman, and it was his debut against us too. Now, Texas was down arguably our best corner. However, we do have some younger pieces. I think that's the reason why we kind of got shredded, is just because we had to really rely on some younger talent in the secondary. The thing that's really puzzling, so I kind of understand like why we got torched a little bit. The thing I'm curious about is what happened with our defensive line. I'm not going to say like the last 3 games, because those were against cream puffs, like exactly like what do you expect Texas to do? But Ohio State, they were really good. Like Ohio State was not able to run the ball. Ohio State was barely able to do anything on defense. So how was Florida able to do this? I don't know. Will we fix it for Red River Week? I don't know, because Brent Venables' defense, they're great. Are they going to be able to get pressure on Arch? Probably so, because we have a lot of young, and that's the other key thing too. I forgot to mention our offensive line. I didn't even realize this until like we played the Ohio State game. We had a lot of talent leave for the pros. We only have one starter back from last year. He's got like 35 starts or whatever, and everybody else just has like 3 to 4 starts. So very young offensive line. They're good, but very young. Okay, so we are susceptible on that, and hopefully they can just improve and whatever, and we have a shot. As far as the season, I mean, it sucked. Don't get me wrong, it sucked by all means. I never expected us to go out and win a championship. I was like, okay, at best we can maybe go compete, but man, I don't know. We could be in some trouble. It will for me. It will kind of just depend on how we do against Oklahoma. Are we able to bounce back and show some resilience? And if we can, however, I would like to say that Oklahoma's quarterback John Mateer still being hurt. If we win against them, people are going to say, "Oh well, they didn't have John Mateer." That is a fair point. However, I think OU is a solid team. So let's just see how they bounce back and I don't know, go from there, I guess. And if we can show the resilience, I think that's a good. I think that's a pretty good indicator. Like, okay, we got a good culture in place, we got a good mindset, and frankly, throughout that game, even if we do lose, I trust the coaches we have. I trust the players we have. It's just their life cycles. Brand new offensive line, basically. Young quarterback life cycle. We just got to wait for them to mature and kind of go from there. Yeah, and whenever that does happen, we'll be good on that side of the ball. Defense, a little bit more questionable. We are young on the secondary a little bit. Um, Good linebackers, so it'll be interesting to see. What were your thoughts? I guess.
Yeah, I think me and you are pretty much on the same page on this game. I agree with you on the Arch talk. I thought Arch. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't great,
Yeah,
um, but I don't think he was the problem. It's always so easy to blame the quarterback, but
exactly.
like you were saying, like Florida was all over him like the
Yeah,
entire game. The offensive line was abysmal.
you could almost
Um,
commend Arch for what he was able to accomplish with what what
yeah,
cards he was dealt. I mean, literally, he would hike the ball and literally have to run all around the field just to make something happen. And there were a couple
yeah,
miscues actually I forgot to mention. He had two passes that if he had enough time to really look at the field. I mean, we had two open wide receivers. He could have just simply, dinked. Two of them were on the same drive, so that one maybe just been one score. And then we had like a little trick pass that Ryan Wingo overthrew our tight end, which could have been some more points, and he was wide open too. So who knows if our offensive line play had been a little bit better just on those two plays? Who knows? Texas could have pulled this out, but they didn't, and it just goes back to the offensive line play and just young players. And yeah,
well, and it may have something to do with the offensive line, but uh, Texas has issues all across the board because, like you said, running the ball is an issue.
hmm
Arch Manning right now is on pace to lead this team in rushing.
yeah,
They are not
that's
running the
not a good. Yeah,
ball
that's not a
well.
good thing either. Yeah,
Yeah, I believe. Let's see. I think Texas ran the ball in this game outside of Arch Manning 9 times for 15 yards.
yeah,
Not good, not good. So it's hard to put it all on Arch Manning. It seems like even the receiver room. I mean, obviously they were going to take a step back this year, but Wingo looks good. But other than that, they're having a little bit of trouble there, just maybe having guys open. So there are some definite issues. I'm with you. But one, I think Florida is a legit defense, so you have to give them some credit. But look, there's some legit defenses out there, and OU is coming up, and they are maybe
very
better
good.
than
Yeah,
Florida. Um,
yeah,
so that's that. But here's the deal: if you had told me going into the game that that was going to kind of be the case, I'd be like, okay, I could see that. But what I did not see happening, as you were saying, is Florida running the ball with ease, pretty
yeah,
much down Texas's throat. I mean, there was just like nothing they could do. I mean, in the later parts of the game, they were kind of stuffing Florida a bit more, but also just the tackling from Texas, not good,
yeah.
not
No, that
good.
was the first game from our defense in like several years. Like that looked like an old Texas defense, just like players just not tackling. I was like, oh my gosh, is this the beginning of the end here?
Right, right. So, Lagway playing hurt, he was 21 for 28, nearly 300 passing yards.
Yeah,
That
he
was
was great.
surprising to see because let's face it, Lagway has not been great this year. So you have to give credit to Billy Napier for sure for putting together this game plan and going out and competing. It, like we said coming into the week, it was a must-win game for them, and they pulled it off. So credit to Florida. Coming up for Florida, they go to Kyle Field, uh, but but yeah, it was fun game to watch. Even though it wasn't maybe it was semi-competitive, but Florida, I thought for the most part, controlled the game,
Oh
and
yeah,
it is going to be
like the
very
entire
interesting.
game, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where both teams go from here because yes, in terms of the playoff hunt, I still think Florida's out of it, but Texas is in it, but they got to be perfect. And this is a spot this week where they need to get back on track. I know they have a few games coming up that it's like, okay, you can kind of get right at Kentucky, at Mississippi State before you have Georgia. But yeah, for Texas fans, it might be, as much as it may suck to think about, a little bit more of a rebuild year, kind of
Yeah,
like you were saying.
that's what I was thinking about as well yesterday. Just thinking about it. Here's the deal: fans just want success right from the get go. Okay, and when does that? I mean, we can make an argument that the transfer portal has made that a little bit easier to accomplish. Yes, but it's not necessarily like a bulletproof thing. Like that, just because you go get these elite players from the transfer portal, which Texas we got a couple players, and one thing I really enjoy about Sark is he just really nitpicks and gets only a couple players that we really need. We don't do like this overhaul, and we retained players very well. But like you said, honestly, like there's issues across the board, wide receiver room, which I think they're good. Like Wingo's good, DeAndre Moore's good, and we actually just got back. I believe his name's Evan Mosley, is Stanford, really good freshman wide receiver last year from Stanford, and he looked good on a couple plays that Arch had time to throw him the ball. We have too many issues, I think, right now to really sit here and say, "Oh yeah, they can be a serious contender for the championship." Now, that being said, if somehow miraculously all that stuff gets fixed, could we make a run? Maybe. That's a stretch, though. And plus, it's a stretch that we're going to be able to get all those things fixed and running at an elite level. Is it possible? Yes. I mean, we got two losses. And, one argument that people had was who's the more disappointing team, Penn State or Texas? And don't get me wrong, like, it is a little bit of a disappointment for me to like go through this as a Longhorn fan. But I was like, guys, like all the sports media people put all this pressure on, like, put all this crap on Texas. And I guess that's how it is every year, right? Like all these people put all this crap on like specific football teams. And it's like, I don't know. It's like you guys just saw Arch Manning and you sat there and put number one on Texas because of that, basically, and didn't really look but between the lines and sit here and say, okay, there could be some potential issues here. Okay. And they should have. And so, do I think that's a fair comparison against Penn State? Not necessarily. Penn State's a more mature team, like we just talked about. Them, like, this is where they're cultivating that garden. Their players are more like senior, junior, like, whereas that was our team last year. This year, we do have a good balance of that. However, we did have a lot of production leave, and we're having to replace that. So our life cycle on the team is a little bit different. So anyway, that's what I like to say. Am I worried? Like, yeah, it sucks. Am I worried? Yeah, potentially. I'll have a more of a definite answer for you next week against OU because with John Mateer looking to be out, I mean, we played. I think it's Hawkins is the quarterback's last name. We played against him last year, and we controlled the ball pretty well defensively. We, got after him. He really wasn't able to do much. So it'll really just be watching the offensive line for me.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. And to your point, it just goes to show. This has been a larger conversation, kind of in the college football world recently, but it just goes to show the somewhat meaninglessness. And maybe we shouldn't even have it. But the preseason polls, you had Penn State, Texas, Florida, Clemson, LSU, Notre Dame, all in the top like 12, I believe it was. Where are they now? Uh, and you have teams like OU, Miami moving up in those polls significantly. So It just goes to show you don't know how these teams are going to be. There's a lot of variance in college football. But speaking of Miami, I think that's the next game we got to get to: Miami versus Florida State.
Let's pause it
What?
real quick before we get into that because Ivy is with
Okay.
me.
All right. Well, let's get into this Miami versus Florida State game. Now, I must be 100% honest with you. This late window, I was pretty busy. You had some pretty big UFC fights on that I had to watch. Obviously, the A&M game, but I was able to watch the majority of this Miami Florida State game. Although I admittedly in the fourth quarter was like, okay, well, I think I've seen enough. I get it. And then I look up and I see Florida State has scored and they've scored again and they've scored again. Um, I think I get the gist of this game, though. I do not think this was as close as the final score suggested. I thought Miami controlled the game. Miami's been impressive all year, every single game. I put them at number two this week. Uh, and you probably have a great argument for them to be number one as far as I'm concerned, but I get, not wanting to put them above Ohio State. Fine. But what they've
I almost
done
think
with
that's a little debatable. I almost,
It's debatable for sure. Yeah, I don't even know where I stand on that.
yeah.
I'm just telling you, I think they're for sure a top three team in the country.
Oh, for
They're
sure.
elite, and just so impressive what they've done with that football program. You got to remember where they've been the past several
Yeah.
years, and for
Yep.
them to, they're not just winning versus bad ACC opponents. They've got some very impressive wins this year, this week going against. I mean, we were just talking about the Texas game, how it feels like a must-win game for Florida. Look, this was a must-win game for Florida State,
Yeah, it
and
was.
Miami went in and pretty much rolled them. We've had the storyline of, well, hey, look, this team's only going to be as good as Carson Beck takes them. Well,
And he had
Carson
a,
Beck has been
yeah,
poised 20 for 27, 241 yards, four touchdowns. He's been fine. He has not been an issue. Very impressed by their true freshman receiver,
yeah.
Malachi Toney.
Mm-hmm.
Seven passes, 107 yards. Uh, he's been very good. We were talking about coming into the week, Florida State. They've been scoring at will, putting up a ton of yards. Uh, this week, what was it? 3 points going into the fourth quarter, 3 points in the third quarter, or something like that. They didn't.
Yeah.
They weren't scoring. So the Miami defense is legitimate
Really good.
defense, because that's
Oh,
a
yeah.
legitimate offense they were just
Offense.
going against, not fluky at
Top
all.
three
Uh,
offense.
for sure, for sure. Florida State, 230 rushing yards in its first four games, held to 132 yards on 38 carries this game against Miami. So couldn't be more impressed with Miami. Florida State side, I think they're out of it. I mean, the ACC
Yeah.
and the way these schedules are built, uh, I don't. I think Florida State is going to be like the fourth team in the ACC. I don't see how they get into the playoff at all. I don't see how they get in the ACC championship. As you know, Miami's for sure now pretty much going to lock it up, barring some sort of disaster. And then you have Georgia Tech and Virginia, which are undefeated in conference play, and Duke now undefeated in conference play. Those teams don't have a tough schedule. They don't face the Miami, FSU, Clemson trio. At
Right.
most, they face one of those teams. And I know Georgia Tech doesn't face Miami or Florida State from here. And I believe that's the case with Virginia as well. So that's just bad news for Florida State in terms of what they want to do. Very interesting season because look, everyone was high on them after they beat Alabama, and rightfully so. But I don't know where they go from here. I don't know what to expect from them. But to me, this is about Miami, and I'm excited to see what they can actually do in terms of the playoff race and all that. But we're a long ways from that. But that's just kind of my general thoughts on this game. You have anything to say about it?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that you have just said. I think really what it boils down to is Florida State gave too many turnovers to Miami. Miami capitalized on two of them, and Florida State's defense held up on one of them. I think it's an interesting game because I think Miami just flat out dominated the entire game. I thought it showed pretty good resilience that Florida State at least came back and had a very, very small chance to come back and win it. They just didn't recover that onside kick at the very end there. But um, Florida State has had 6 turnovers in the last 2 weeks. That's a very big. That's very that makes it very easy for the other team to win the game, right? If you're sitting there giving them more possessions, that's just going to give them more of a chance to go score. So if they really want to be successful this year, and by all means, I think that their playoff race is done and over with. But if they want to be able to, I don't know, still have a 10-win year, they're going to have to be nearly perfect. Okay. And pretty much they should. I'm going to take a look at their schedule real quick. They really shouldn't have anybody else that's like, oh crap. I mean, they have Clemson and Florida, those 2 games. Those could be very interesting. And really and truly, if Clemson shows up and Florida shows up, then they could lose those games too. So I could see them being 8-4
Yep.
or, 10-2. Either way, uh, I don't know. I guess the question is, was it a fluke game that Florida State had against Alabama?
Yeah, I mean, I would say no. I think they beat them completely, legitimately. You know, Florida State has the talent. They have great coaching, and the game versus Virginia was a little bit of a trap game. To me, I think this game was more just about Miami. I think Miami is just that good, and Florida State just put themselves in a bad position against Virginia. Yeah, Florida State getting that win overrated themselves. Uh, just because look, you just beat Alabama, but let's not forget they were at home, first game of the season. For whatever reason, Alabama wasn't clicking at that point. Things like that happen, but no, I still think Florida State is good. They're just not elite. They're probably not top 10 good, but they're good.
You were mentioning Miami, uh, just this being about Miami, and I completely agree with you. Um, Stop Florida State, which arguably is a top 3 offense, 7 straight drives, 4 punts, 3 turnovers. Okay, held them to. Florida State has had 230 yards or more rushing in every game leading up to this, or in the first 4 games. Um, Miami's defense held them to 132. Okay, on 38 carries, which is 3.5 yards per carry. That's not easy to do against this offense. Also, and at the end of the day, what does this boil down to? Team success? I mean, a huge majority of it is on the quarterback's shoulders. Carson Beck is playing very good. This game specifically, he played pretty much a perfect game. You couldn't ask more from your quarterback. Carson Beck is battle tested. He's been in huge games pretty much every single year. Okay, so I think I still think the success is on Carson Beck's shoulders. If he has a fluke or if he has a bad game or something, puts him in a bad situation. I think Miami has proven themselves. If they were to lose a game, they probably still could get in the playoffs. But anyway, it'll be interesting. And they've got a good supporting cast around them on that offense too. Like you said, that true freshman wide receiver, and even their other wide receiver, I forgot his name, Daniels. He was pretty good too. Their senior wide receiver. There was somebody else I was thinking about on the offense. I can't remember, but anyway, Miami looks really good, really good.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, speaking of teams that look really good, the Vandy Alabama game, Alabama continues to look really good. Was very curious about this coming into the week. Would it be a competitive game, not a competitive game? In many ways, the opposite of the Miami Florida State game, in the sense that, the Miami Florida State, that game was not as close as the score suggests. This game was closer than the score suggests. And I have to be the first one to say I was wrong about Vandy. Not a lot of people are maybe going to be having that takeaway from this game. Uh, but to me, I was very impressed by Vanderbilt. They were right in it. They're in the first half. They were ahead in the first quarter. Alabama was playing as if they were going against the boogeyman out there. It's like, oh crap, we've got Vanderbilt. We don't know how to play. Like they just looked off. Like they thought Vandy was going to do some sort of crazy voodoo magic. And then they did do some crazy voodoo magic there in the first half. But as much as we talked about Pavia, and rightfully so, what impressed me in the first half was the Vandy defense. I mean, they were really holding Alabama. Alabama was struggling to move the ball. They weren't scoring. And uh, Alabama's defense, it was like, okay, their front seven, they can't figure out this quarterback option that Vandy has going on. And it looks like it could be a long day for the Alabama defense. It reminded me, he was on the sideline, but it reminded me Johnny Manziel. I mean, he was really, Pavia was really doing well, but it just goes to show you can't be one dimensional, and you can't be one dimensional against a team like Alabama, because in that second half, they completely figured it out, and there was nothing Pavia could do. And there's only so much the Vanderbilt defense could do against a player like Ty Simpson, who, by the way, in a year where there's no clear Heisman favorite, I think you have to start talking about Ty Simpson
Oh,
more
for
and more,
sure.
especially if Alabama runs the table. 340 passing yards. They continue to air it out. He's doing great. And, as the Vanderbilt defense they kept having to come out there, be perfect. There's just always so perfect you can be
Yeah.
against a team like Alabama. So credit to Vanderbilt for keeping this close. I mean, it really was a close game. The 30-14 final score does not do it justice. Um, and Vanderbilt, unfortunately for them, their schedule going forward is just brutal. Like seriously, they may finish like 6-6 just because of their schedule, but they're better than a 6-6 team. I mean, they basically have Florida's schedule. So sucks for them, but they're a legitimate top 25 team, not a fluky top 25 team. They are very good. I respect Pavia. How far can he take them? I don't know. But, one of the stories of this game specifically was the Alabama time of possession. Basically doubled Vanderbilt in terms of their time of possession. They controlled the football, didn't give Vanderbilt all the chances in the world. And so when Vanderbilt did have the chance, they had to be perfect. And that really isn't their game. Uh, Alabama clearly back, here to stay. They've got some interesting games coming up, including this week at Missouri. That's quite the three-game stand for them:
Yeah.
Georgia, Vandy, and then
Yeah.
at Missouri. That's going to be interesting. That's going to be a very interesting game. But interesting storylines for both going forward. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the game. Continue to be impressed by Alabama, legitimate top 10 team. And yeah, what were your takeaways?
So I think I pretty much agree with what you're saying. Vanderbilt throughout the week, people are like, okay, yes, it's Vanderbilt. It's a different team, which it is. Do not get me wrong. However, there's still separation between the Alabama players and Vanderbilt. And really, I really commend Vanderbilt because that being said, if you sit there and realize, okay, Alabama has a clear distinction, or there's a clear distinction between the talent level on both these teams. Vanderbilt, until like the third quarter, made this game very competitive. Okay. Um, I really think that Diego Pavia, he played good, not his best game by any means, but like I told you in the previous episode, Vanderbilt they can't be one dimensional. They can't put this on Diego Pavia to go throw and win for them. And that's kind of almost what they did, basically. In Alabama, their offense, I really think that Alabama, man, I know we were both really, I think we're both high on Miami. I think we're also both pretty high on Alabama, and we'll get to this in a little bit and talk about the AP poll. But with them being 8, it's a little questionable in my opinion. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. Um, like you said earlier, Ty Simpson having a huge game, which he did, but also the running back had 136 rushing yards. So Miami was able to still have a balanced attack, really balanced attack.
Alabama, you mean? Yes.
Yeah, Alabama. Uh huh.
You said Miami, but go ahead. Go.
Oh, excuse me. Yes. Okay. Alabama had a really balanced running attack for sure. Um, so I think the other team so far that has solidified themselves as like, okay, they've actually played really decent opponents and played really well against them. I think it's got to be Alabama. Alabama and Miami are like, I think they're separating themselves. So it'll be very interesting to see. Vanderbilt, they play LSU next. Okay. I think that's very interesting too, because I believe last week's episode when LSU played Ole Miss, we were both kind of like, ooh, and I'm just curious. Number one, I think will be interesting is how does Vanderbilt show up? Okay. Did they put a lot of stock into this Alabama game, which I'm sure they did? I mean, who wouldn't? But how will they show up to the LSU game? Are they going to show that same consistency as far as like approach, good overall gameplay? Or is it just going to be like LSU just goes out and like steamrolls them? And I think it will be very impressive if Vanderbilt is able to punch toe to toe with him. Um, it, I'd probably still pick LSU to win, but what would be impressive, even if Vanderbilt still loses, is like it's very competitive in the fourth quarter, and that kind of shows you, okay, Vanderbilt's got something right going on here. And like you said, they may end up 6-6, but they're deserving of a top 25 spot. Um, and with the Alabama Missouri game next week, it'll be very interesting. And like you said, very tough stretch of games to play, especially this early in the season when everybody else is just now playing maybe their first hard game. Alabama's already gotten several under their belt. So anyway, very, very interesting game. Commendable service by the Vanderbilt Commodores. However, Alabama just powerful.
They're just better. Alabama's schedule coming up, like we talked about, at Missouri, and then hosting Tennessee. So they've got plenty of chances. They've already done it, but they've rebounded from that Florida State loss. But they've also got plenty of chances to prove that they're not flawless. And they're against some pretty good teams. I mean, after that, they've got at South Carolina. You never know about those road games, and then they host LSU and they host Oklahoma. So it's going to be an interesting season for
Yeah.
the Tide. It's not over yet in terms of what they're going to do.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, they're definitely like Alabama is very good. I mean, there's holes like many teams have. I mean, like let's say I don't know if Alabama were to play Ole Miss right now, who'd win that game? It'd be very interesting because Lane Kiffin, like we talked about last week, heading into this Alabama Vanderbilt game, mobile quarterbacks give Alabama's defense fits. Okay, well Lane Kiffin always has a mobile quarterback. Lane Kiffin's always like a really good play caller, rush the ball very well, and that's what Alabama's defense has problems with is controlling the rush. Okay, and Diego Pavia still, by the way, had like 58 rushing yards too on top of all his passing, so they didn't necessarily stop him. And then they had a couple other players like 40 yards, 30 yards, whatever. So I think Alabama like controlled Vanderbilt enough, but then again, it goes to the talent level. Like, okay, yes, Vanderbilt has Diego Pavia, I get that, but would Alabama be able to stop the rush like they did against Vanderbilt, against Ole Miss, or uh, like another, really good team in the SEC? I don't know. It'll be interesting to kind of see how they play.
Agreed. Well, I think you would agree that that was kind of the big four this week, and there were still other games that that are worth briefly mentioning. I don't know if you had any specifically you wanted to talk about. I have one that before this podcast we didn't discuss, but I want to bring it up. And it's a team I continue to be impressed by. They've got a big game this week. A lot of people were ready to just write off this team, and I get it. But that is Illinois. They beat Purdue. And just to show you how different this team this year is compared to years past, because obviously we've never talked about Illinois like ever. This is the first time they've had back to back wins against Purdue since 2002. That has been the state of the Illinois program up to this point. This is one that I kind of had on a side TV, but Altmaier, 19 for 22, 390 yards. There were questions about him coming into the year. Can he be really good for them? He has been really good. This game started out Purdue scoring seven quickly. And it's like, okay, does Illinois just have a problem playing on the road because of how they were against Indiana at Indiana? But then Illinois, 24 unanswered points, very impressive. Purdue, by the way, a team you got to beat, but they're a competitive team in the sense that they were playing with Notre Dame uh, right up until like the third quarter there, and then Notre Dame pulled away from them. Purdue is known in the Big Ten as a team like one of those sleeper teams that you kind
Yeah.
of got to watch out for. You know, they could just put up a fight any given day. So credit to Illinois. Got to give them credit for what they're doing. I'll be very excited this week. They're at home against Ohio State. Very tough for them, but I continue to be very impressed by them. Uh, do you have any thoughts on that game? If not, what other game kind of caught your eye this week?
I didn't necessarily have any thoughts on that game per se. Like, however, I remember watching several games last year from the Illinois played. I really like their coach, Brett Belima. Very interesting what he's been able to do. I think last year they were able to get up into like the teams as far as rankings go. This year they were in the top 10 for a couple weeks until they lost to Indiana pretty badly. But we'll see kind of like how good or bad that loss would have been, I guess. But I think Illinois is a very interesting team. Luke Altmaier has impressed me since going back to last year. Is he a flashy quarterback? No, not necessarily, but he doesn't always have to be for them to win. Brett Bielema likes to run the ball first and foremost, control the line of scrimmage. And so Luke Altmaier, all he really has to do is just, not throw any. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. It's just, I think hold on one second. All right. Basically, Luke Altmaier has to just play a good game, not turn the ball over, and then Illinois is in a good spot. I think the other game that I wanted to kind of briefly talk about was the Texas-Houston game. I think Texas Tech just dominated that game against an old quarterback of yours, interestingly enough. But yeah, Tech just dominated the game. Defense looked great. Offense was like really balanced. Are they the team to beat in the Big 12? I'm not sure. But if they can come out and win the next three, really the next two, I think we could probably have our answer to that question. They play Kansas next, which that's a sleeper game. Kansas is unranked, but they still have, they have capabilities of upset. Okay. And then Arizona State. Okay. So the next two games for Tech will be crucial. They'll be big. It'll be interesting to see kind of where they're sitting at after those 2 weeks. And I don't know if you saw this, but they just had another 5-star commit this week. And so now Texas Tech has the number one edge and the number one defensive lineman in the country for, I believe it's next year. So I'm not sure how, but their coach is, well, actually, I do know how. I guess it's boiling down to money, but it's interesting how I'm wondering what he's paying these players, but they're really starting to turn the culture around. I think it's an interesting story in college football because, like you said, or like we have said a little bit, Texas Tech, are they a premier school? Not really, to be honest with you. Now that could change in the next couple of years, but with the landscape of NIL, their coach has done a very good job as far as pivoting them into good situations and growing that football team to being a serious threat in the Big 12. So, did you have any thoughts on that game? That's odd.
I didn't have very many thoughts on that game. I know Wigman, I think, came out of the game. He
Yeah, I
got
did.
injured. I don't know how significant it was, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
just one
really
of those
didn't play
things where
well when he was in there, though. He didn't play well.
yeah, and I don't know if I can blame him because Texas Tech, I think,
Yeah.
is just on another level from Houston. That is a fascinating conference to watch. With you have Cincinnati, Arizona State. I think TCU's put themselves maybe out of it, but I think if TCU is perfect, they can have a shot. But I guess that does lead into the next game. I was kind of watching in that 12 o'clock window, 11 o'clock window for us. Is the Iowa State Cincinnati game? In our picks this week, you chose Iowa State to win the game outright. Great pick by you. Of course not. But Cincinnati pretty much handles Iowa State. Now, Iowa State had a lot of secondary guys out
Yeah.
in this game. I'm glad Iowa State lost because I've kind of been watching them, and I just don't think they're that good. I don't think they were deserving of the number 14 team. But give credit to Iowa State because Cincinnati was blowing their doors off. Iowa State came back in the second half, made this a game. Had
Yeah.
a very real opportunity to win this game. Couldn't pull it off. Cincinnati is now right there in contention to be in that Big 12 title game, win the Big 12 potentially. I don't know where they're going to go. I know I believe, beat Kansas last week, and I expected Kansas to win that game. So Cincinnati's been interesting. Their only loss is to Nebraska, and that was 20-17. So watch out for Cincinnati the rest of the way. But like I said, impressed by Iowa State's fight. They're not out of it by any means, Iowa State, because they did have guys down that game. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I didn't really have any like thoughts on that game specifically. I thought Iowa State just, they had a really good balanced attack. They fought back, like you said. And I really think I'm going to have to start really taking a note on Cincinnati and really, frankly, the Big 12 too, because BYU still undefeated in there
yep.
as well. And, um, I think when it gets to December time or November, December, I think the Big 12 will be a very interesting conference. Not necessarily because I think it's fantastic, like it's a top, it's like the top conference, but it's just almost like, okay, there's quite a bit of teams here that could win it all. Which one will do it, I guess. And I mean, really and truly, you know, Texas Tech, I don't know. I think they're going to be the team for me to sit there and do it. But we'll see. I think next week, like I said, will be a good test for them playing Kansas.
I think Texas Tech is kind of there's a bit of a gap between them and the number two team in that conference, but we will see because you're like you were saying, like yeah, it's not the best conference, but there's a lot of chaos in that conference, and it's just fun to watch. A
Hmm.
lot of people think actually that BYU is really good. They were really good last year. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet with BYU, but look, they've got a chance to prove it. But it's a fascinating conference to watch for sure. Now, look, we are an hour in. Uh, I'm kind of done with the games I want to talk about before we move on to the AP poll. Was there anything else you wanted to say on the games this week, or do you want to move into the AP poll?
Um, I think that might be the only other game, which I'm kind of surprised you didn't want to briefly talk about it, was the Mississippi State A&M game. And like briefly, I thought I have to. Well, okay, I'm trying to sit here and think how to say this. Mississippi State made it pretty competitive in the first quarter. Then after that, you guys took over. You guys had a really good run game. Marcel Reed, he had an okay day passing. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on him, like his game. He had 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and the interception was like pretty early on in the game, and then after that, he was really good. But what are your thoughts on him? Because you guys have a really good running back field, and honestly, I think that you could argue that could they dethrone the Penn State or gosh, what was the other team we were talking about last week with the running back duo? Anyway, you guys have a really good running
Notre
back
Dame.
duo. Yeah, Notre Dame, exactly. Um, and you guys have really good wide receivers too. Okay, so we're discuss Marcel Reed just a little bit, I guess, on your take on him.
Well, my thoughts on him and the team. were basically the same as they were last week, and it's maybe a different direction than a lot of say A&M pundits would take it, but I just don't want to hear him anywhere near this Heisman conversation. There is a thing that we do where if a team is doing well as a team and they're undefeated like A&M is, it's like, oh well, we got to talk about the quarterback for Heisman. No, you talk about for Heisman the players that are performing best. And Marcel Reed, this is a hot take, what I'm about to say. And yeah, I brought it out to some people, and they're like, yeah, that's a little too hot. And I agree, but it gets the point across. I don't think Marcel Reed's been much better than Arch Manning this year. If you watch the games, Marcel continues to miss open guys that are just standing right in front of him. Uh, is he a dull threat? A little bit, but not actually that much of a dull threat because he's so small. They don't want to run him too much because he's going to
You
get
said that
hurt.
last week, and I made sure to kind of watch him a little bit. And he actually is a little bit smaller than I realized.
Yeah, yeah. So
Just thinner.
he's
He doesn't have that much meat on the bones, so to speak.
yeah, and he's already gotten hurt in games twice this year. Nothing significant, but like, am I going to be surprised if he just goes down and he's out for a game all of a sudden? Like, no, I'm not going to be surprised at all. So look, am I like out on Marcel? No, kind of like you were saying with Arch Manning, like you got to let these guys develop. But
Yeah,
here's the deal:
he's
you
a
just said,
sophomore, so it's
yeah,
not
he's a
like
sophomore.
yeah. I mean, and
Well,
yes,
but
he's had more starting. He started more games than Arch has, but still a sophomore. We're kind of getting used to these.
well,
What?
not many more games.
Well, no, not many more games, but I'm just saying, a couple. And people
Yeah.
are just like, I don't know really what it is, and honestly, maybe this could have started off with Johnny Manziel, just people to be true freshmen coming in and just lighting it up and just being the
Mm.
best thing ever. And historically, that's not been the case. Like look at Joe Burrow. He had that amazing season his senior year. And I mean, there's other quarterbacks too. You got to be patient with the quarterback. I think you brought up a good, interesting point. With him being like on the same level as Arch Manning, I can't necessarily contribute to that argument because I haven't sat there and watched Marcel Reed like I have Arch. But I think it's a safe bet to say that you guys at least have a better offensive line than we do. You guys, for
Yes.
whatever reason, and it's kind of odd, but you guys always have at least one offensive lineman that's like going in the top 3 rounds of the draft every year. It's kind of odd how that goes, but so with that being said, Marcel Reed having a better offensive line to work with, really good, and probably I would maybe take just where your wide receivers are at right now. I'd probably take them. Concepcion, and then I forgot the other guy but he's really good too.
Marcel Craver. Yeah.
Craver, yeah. So those are really good wide receivers, and like I said, one of the best backfields. So Colin Klein, or yeah, that's the name of the
Yes.
offense. Yeah, Colin Klein, he's got some toys to play with on that offense, and I remember telling you like whenever you guys hired him, I was like, I think that's like a really good coordinator for you guys with what Mike Elko wants. And plus, I mean, I remember playing against. I mean, Colin Klein played at Kansas State under Bill Snyder. Very run heavy team. I mean, honestly, Bill Snyder, one of the best coaches in all of college football history. Okay, so Colin Klein's definitely learned a lot from him. Playing underneath him, anyway. I think offensively, you guys are pretty good. I think really Marcel Reed, just kind of like Luke Altmaier, just don't give the defense any turnovers, any interceptions, fumbles, or anything like that. And I think you guys will be fine, honestly. So,
Well, we'll see. Here's the deal. I disagree on a couple points. First of all, the Craver and Concepcion duo, and you were talking about the backfield. But specifically the receivers, I don't think it's crazy to say it's the best receiver duo in college football. I really think that. I think they've both been extremely good. But that's kind of my problem. Is like we have these weapons and really, the offense outside of the Notre Dame game, but even if you watch that game, there's a bunch of missed opportunities from Marcel Reed. And yes, he needs to develop and all that. But where I disagree with you, and I've disagreed with you since last year, and a lot of A&M fans disagree too, is Colin Klein. I don't think he's been good. I don't think the offense has ever really been clicking. And again, is that him or is that Marcel Reed? I don't know. I know also, and this is just a coaching
He's been there
problem in
for like 2
general.
years, right? Yeah, he's
Two
been there for
years, it's the second year. Um, but the penalties for A&M, I think we're 125th in the nation in penalties, meaning that we commit a lot, and that's killed us. It kills us every week on our first offensive drive. We have penalties, and so we start out in a hole. Then, as far as what you were saying, credit to Mississippi State for the first quarter, keeping it competitive. I don't give credit to Mississippi State. I think it was all A&M just not clicking, not firing on all cylinders. Mississippi State offensively couldn't do a whole lot. Give credit to the A&M defense; they're showing up. The only team that has really put up numbers against them is Notre Dame. They're doing that to everybody. I think A&M. If you look at that final score, 31-9, you say, "Oh, they blew them out." Second half, we definitely pulled away, but we were not. We are yet to put together 4 quarters of good football. And look, that could be a good thing. That could be like, okay, well, imagine when you do, because you can move it offensively. Your defense is looking formidable. But the problem is like, okay, but why haven't you yet? There's clearly some sort of execution issues. So I'm not sitting here telling you that A&M is here, that they are just an elite team. I don't think they're there yet. I think they have the capability to be, but I want to see a lot more from them. And they're going to have an opportunity to do that in the weeks coming forward. But I really worry about this team going on the road at Missouri, at LSU, at Texas. You got to be playing better than you have been. And yeah, that's my general thoughts on A&M.
I think it's a good. I mean, I think that's a good question. Is it more Marcel Reed or Colin Klein? And Colin Klein, he's been there for 2 years. Who has his quarterbacks been? Connor Wegman and Marcel Reed for the most part. And then maybe there was one other quarterback too that played for Connor
No, that
Wegman.
was it.
Yeah. Connor Wegman was like injury prone, just yeah. Basically what I'm trying to say is like all the quarterbacks that Colin Klein has had to work with are young in their developmental stage. He has yet to have like a quarterback that's like a senior, junior, whatever, that's really got some games under their belt. And so I totally get where the dissatisfaction is, but it also goes back to that patience. And don't get me wrong, I have that problem sometimes myself, especially whenever you have all the toys around that you could want in the world, and you're not able to capitalize on them because of where quarterback's development is. But anyway, talking about the next couple weeks, I think next week is going to be a big game for you guys. Florida. See how Florida, like if Florida is able to approach or is able to come to that game and play you guys the same way that they did against us, you guys might be in some trouble. I think it could be a slogfest, but we'll see. Is Florida going to be able to be consistent in their gameplay that they were with us this past week? If they do, potential trouble. It could be Marcel Reed coming out of that shell and being better. I don't know. We'll kind of see.
We'll see. Yeah, next week's going to be exciting,
Yes.
especially whenever we break down all the games there. But let's talk about the AP poll for this week. I will give you kind of my opening thoughts, and I will be the first one to tell you I'm usually very critical of these polls.
Hmm.
I actually thought they did a good job this week. I don't really see any major issues. Quickly will tell you I think the coaches poll is a joke for a few reasons. I just now saw this. Someone has Texas A&M as the number one team in the country. Okay, that's ridiculous. But I wasn't even. I literally just now saw that. But also in the coaches poll, Texas and Penn State are ranked, which is
Oh
ridiculous. They should
wow!
not be ranked at all.
Please, good
That's
God
crazy.
Almighty! What
So
what's
I
the
was
rank on Texas? Just
Texas is 19, Penn State is 22. And yeah, I think that's insane. I saw this come out yesterday, and I was like, "Oh my God, is the AP going to follow suit?" And people are going crazy, but the AP did the right thing. I have no issues here. Miami number two, fine. Oregon three, um, top 10 looks good to me. LSU 11, fine. I mean, I'm going down here. I'm happy Notre Dame is top 16. Illinois, I'm happy they're in the top 20. Still don't really understand how BYU got that high. Whatever. Yeah, I'm happy to see Memphis and South Florida ranked, and I'm happy. I'm actually happy Florida State is still ranked, but I agree that they should be right on that edge. So I'm okay with this poll. What about you?
I would probably agree. I mean, kind of earlier when we were talking about the Alabama game, and I get maybe why they haven't moved them more ahead is just because everybody ahead of them right now is undefeated. But yeah, I pretty much agree with it for the most part. I mean, maybe arguably Georgia over Tech, but I mean, that's a very, very little difference. So I can't sit here and nitpick it too hard. I'm glad that Notre Dame is still at 16. We're both very high on them. Um, I'm glad Vanderbilt didn't really go because I think they were 18 before the Alabama game and they only went back to 20. So that's very good. So I only fell two spots. Yeah, I think it's overall a good week as far as the AP poll goes. Now, the coaches poll, now that is a different story.
Uh, Insane,
Yeah,
insane.
you know, do I think Texas should be ranked? No, no. I mean, but the other aisle, maybe just because, like, how many teams would win against Ohio State right now? I don't know. But the Florida game, and I think we both would agree that they're unranked, but depending on the schedules, could Florida have a better record if they didn't play such a hard schedule? Probably so, but still, what Florida's 2-3 now, and we lost to them. I mean, we don't deserve that, especially Penn State, the fashion that they lost to UCLA. So,
Texas and Penn State are two of four teams to have not beat anyone in the top 100 yet. So you got to beat somebody eventually,
well, yeah,
and
exactly,
those
for
teams haven't
sure.
done it.
Yeah,
But yeah, okay, yeah. The only team that maybe you could argue should be in the rankings, but I agree that they're not, and they're number 26, and that's Cincinnati. But they're right there. Whatever. I'm good with all this. So yeah, interesting way of college football. I'm really looking forward to this one coming up, and we'll get more into that later in the week. So yeah, any closing thoughts?
we had an interesting week with not as many like headlining games. I think next week there's a ton of headlining games. It's going to be very interesting. So make sure to stay tuned and see our preview for that. And then of course after the games, stay tuned to see what we thought of each game.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, Caleb, I'll see you next time.
All right, see ya.